It all began on a stormy night. In the middle of nowhere, a group of nervous men rushed through the storm to reach their chief. They were a patrolling police unit, and they needed him to come with them quickly. When they got there, the chief stood frozen by the sight in front of him. Something strange had washed up on the British coast. It was a cargo ship, huge and lifeless, just sitting there on the rocks like a ghost. One of the inspectors stepped off the ship, his face pale and eyes wide like he had seen something terrible. When the chief asked what he found, the man said something that sent shivers down everyone's spine. There was no one left alive on board, not a single soul. The only thing they found was the captain's log, a diary of everything that happened during the voyage. The chief opened it and flipped to a random page, his hands already shaking. That page began in the middle of a night at sea, when everyone had gone to sleep except for two men, the ship's doctor and a crewman named Olgarin. Olgarin had a telescope pointed out over the dark waves, just doing his job, when suddenly something flashed across the lens. He yanked the telescope down in fear, but whatever it was had already vanished. Still, it left him with a cold dread. Then he noticed something else. Worms. Dozens of them were squirming on the deck. At the same time, the doctor was steering the ship, keeping it steady, but even he caught a glimpse of something, or someone, lurking on deck. He quickly tied the wheel in place with a rope and went down to check, calling out for Olgarin, thinking maybe it was just him moving around. But then Olgarin stepped out of the shadows, confused, asking if the doctor had seen something. The doctor looked around and said quietly,
"See what? There's no one on deck but us."
Meanwhile, down below, in the dark insides of the ship, the captain's dog was sniffing around the cargo hold as something didn't smell right. He followed the scent into the shadows with his ears perked, and that's when he saw it, a dark shape moving silently in the far corner of the hold. The dog froze, then started barking like crazy at something only he could see. Back on the shore, the chief flipped the log back to the very beginning, needing to know how this nightmare started. It was 4 weeks ago. The ship was named the Demeter, and it was docked at the port of Varna. This was supposed to be a simple cargo trip without any passengers, just boxes and barrels. But the ship was still short a few men, so the captain told the quartermaster to hire 3 strong crew members quickly. A bunch of rough-looking men showed up, but among them was one odd candidate, a doctor who said he had studied at Cambridge and needed to get to London. He offered to work during the voyage in exchange for passage, but the guy looked way too soft for the sea as his hands were clean with no scars or calluses, and the deputy figured he wouldn't last a day, so he picked 3 tougher men instead. Not long after, another group arrived with some unusual cargo, consisting of large wooden crates. They seemed in a real hurry to leave and flat out refused to help load the boxes. The quartermaster argued, said they had to assist, but one old man handed over extra coins to the crew and walked away quickly without saying another word. As the crew was lifting the crates, one of the men noticed something weird. There was a symbol on one of the boxes, an ancient dragon. The moment he saw it, his hand slipped. The crate almost crashed straight onto the captain's grandson. The doctor, without thinking twice, jumped in and pulled the boy out just in time, saving his life. The man who spotted the dragon symbol freaked out, said it was a bad omen. He turned to the quartermaster.
"I know this mark. It is a bad omen. The devil's serpent. God save you all."
And quit on the spot, said they should all just walk away from this voyage while they still could. The moment the quartermaster saw the doctor risk his life to save the captain's grandson, he changed his mind without hesitation and offered him a spot on the crew. Once all 50 crates were finally loaded onto the Demeter, the ship pulled away from the port and began its long journey across the sea. The captain's grandson, a cheerful boy named Toby, was thrilled to have someone new on board and wasted no time showing the doctor around the ship. He mentioned that if anything ever went wrong, a hard knock on the cargo hold wall could be heard all the way in the captain's cabin because of how the ship was built. Since the voyage was long, they had packed a bunch of livestock near the cargo hold for food and even brought along a pet dog. Tucked deeper inside the ship was the kitchen, run by a quiet old-fashioned cook who took his beliefs very seriously. There were 5 other crew members on board, all experienced with sea life. The captain, who was the oldest among them, had spent most of his life at sea. When the quartermaster gave him the final update, the captain nodded and said this would be his last trip before retiring to a quiet cottage in Ireland. After that, the Demeter would belong to the quartermaster, and that made him proud. That evening, everyone squeezed into the cramped dining room for dinner, sharing laughs and dreams about the big bonus they would get once the shipment was delivered. But just when things felt light, the mood shifted. The dog started barking at the cargo hold like it sensed something was wrong. Then the livestock joined in, growing agitated, snorting and pacing in their pens. One of the crew called out to Toby to go take a look, and the doctor, who believed animals often sense storms before they hit, decided to go with him. Down below, the animals were in a frenzy, shuffling and banging into the walls. And just as a massive wave slammed into the ship, something heavy fell over inside the cargo hold. The doctor told Toby to alert the captain right away, while he went to check it out himself. As he stepped inside the hold, he found that one of the wooden crates had broken open. Soil had spilled out across the floor, and there was a strange cloth tangled in the dirt. As he leaned in to inspect it, the dirt began to shift. Suddenly, a woman crawled out from the pile of soil like she had been buried alive, scaring the doctor half to death. Her skin was pale as snow, her body clearly drained and weak, showing signs of anemia. The doctor rushed her up to the deck with the captain's help, while the doctor immediately prepared to treat her. The quartermaster warned that she could be carrying something dangerous, maybe even a plague, but the doctor ignored him and got to work with the only tools he had, setting up a blood transfusion using his simple kit, determined to save her life. Back below, in the darkness of the cargo hold, the crate marked with the dragon symbol gave off low, muffled sounds. The wooden lid creaked as something inside began to move. Something ancient and terrible was waking up. Not wanting to risk the woman being around the crew just yet, the captain ordered that she be placed inside the carpenter's shed until they figured out who, or what she really was. The next morning, the cook got up early like always, ready to start preparing food for the day. But the moment he stepped in, something felt wrong. There was a foul smell in the air, like something had gone bad overnight. Then he saw it. The dog was lying still in a pool of blood, and all the livestock in the pen were dead too, their throats ripped open like something had torn through them in the night. One of the dead animals was dragged upstairs to be examined, and when the captain saw it, his face turned hard, and he warned everyone that if a man on board had done this, he would be chained up without hesitation. Tension sparked instantly as one of the crew members, a hot-headed sailor named Petrovsky, pointed straight at the woman they had found and blamed her. But the doctor stood firm and reminded them she was too weak to even stand, let alone kill animals. He suggested that maybe the dog had been infected with rabies and had attacked the others before dying, but the rest of the crew was not convinced. They said the dog was loyal, obedient, and never showed signs of violence. The captain, unsure who to believe, made the decision to head for port, thinking there could be an outbreak on board. But the crew pushed back hard, reminding him that if the goods did not reach their destination, they would lose their bonuses. Trying to calm things down, the doctor explained that rabies only spreads through bites, and if it were a real outbreak, they would have seen more signs by now. As the captain walked off to consider his options, Petrovsky turned on the doctor, hurling racist insults and accusing him of being the cause of their troubles. The doctor stepped forward, ready to respond, but before the argument exploded, Olgarin interrupted them. His voice was low and cold as he said evil was on this ship, and no human hand was behind what had happened. To prevent the rotting animal bodies from spreading disease, the crew hauled the carcasses to the edge of the ship and dumped them into the sea, but that did nothing to ease what had happened. Nobody could explain what had killed the animals, and a quiet fear began to build across the crew. Something was way off, and whatever had caused this horror was still hiding somewhere down in the cargo hold, watching and waiting for the right moment to strike again. Then came the weather. For the next 3 days the skies turned dark, and the sea became wild and angry. With the storm tossing the ship around, the crew barely had time to think, let alone talk about what had happened. Everyone focused on keeping the vessel afloat while the doctor stayed by the woman's side, continuing to give her blood transfusions every day. Though she still showed no signs of waking up, she remained as pale and still as when they found her. Toby visited her often, sitting quietly by her side, helping where he could. He once heard her whisper in her sleep and picked up her name, Anna. That was all they knew about her. The ship calmed down after a few days, and the terrible incident with the livestock started to feel like a nightmare that had faded. But the cook knew better. He kept noticing things others missed. The ship's rats, which usually darted back and forth across the deck and through the storage, had vanished. Not a single one remained. To the cook, that was a bad sign, a worse one than the dead animals. He knew that when the rats abandoned ship, something far worse than storms is coming. And he was right. In the dead of night, with the waves quiet and the wind low, Petrovsky was on watch duty. The ship creaked softly under his boots as he paced, when suddenly he heard a strange knocking sound echoing through the lower decks. He followed it, thinking maybe one of the crew was messing with him. That's when he noticed a large gaping hole in the roof of the cargo hold. Before he could figure out how it got there, a strange noise rose from the shadows. As he stepped deeper into the dark, he spotted something crouching in the corner, something pale and unnatural crawling low to the ground. He stood there frozen, unsure of what he was looking at, but the thing did not stay still for long. It suddenly sprang forward like a beast, its claws tearing into his throat. Before he even had a chance to scream, Petrovsky staggered backward, reaching for his knife, but it was too late. The creature pounced, knocking him to the ground before sinking its teeth in, draining his blood while he lay there, powerless to fight back. Moments later, the doctor stepped out, sensing something was wrong, but when he reached the area, Petrovsky's body was gone without a trace. What he did find was the hole in the roof of the cargo hold, with no explanation. He looked around, confused and alert, then sounded the alarm. But in the far dark corner, hidden from sight, the creature was still there, silently feeding on what was left of Petrovsky. The next day, the crew gathered silently on the deck, their eyes heavy with dread, their minds stuck on the disappearance of Petrovsky. No one could say whether the man was alive or dead, or what exactly had taken him in the darkness. While they stood there deep in thought, the door to the carpenter's shed creaked open, and out stepped Anna. The doctor told the captain that he had finished examining the dead animals and was sure of one thing: their necks had been torn open, arteries ripped out, and they had clearly been bitten by something savage. Before anyone could respond, Anna suddenly shouted that he was here, and they needed to leave the ship right away because the creature was still hiding somewhere on board. She looked terrified, her voice shaking, but most of the crew dismissed her right away and had the doctor take her back. The quartermaster warned everyone not to listen to her nonsense. Their job was to reach their destination, not to panic over ghost stories or lose focus because of one frightened woman. But the doctor could not ignore her. Something about the way she looked at him, the terror in her eyes, made him want to know more. When no one was watching, he spoke with her in secret. He asked who she was talking about and what she meant by that creature being on the ship. Anna looked at him, her voice low and steady now, and told him that an ancient evil lived in the mountains near her village, hidden inside a castle older than any kingdom or country. This evil wore the face of a man but was not human. It lived on human blood and came out only at night. The villagers called him Dracula, and she had suffered under his curse for a long time. To keep the rest of the village safe, the chief had offered Anna as a sacrifice a living blood bag, and she had been trapped with the monster until the doctor rescued her. As she told her story, she lifted her clothes and showed the doctor the marks on her body, deep, vicious bite wounds still healing. She warned that Dracula was going to London and that he needed to stay hidden below deck during the day to avoid sunlight. He could not leave the ship while they were at sea, which meant time was running out. If they waited too long, everyone on board would be dead. While that quiet conversation was happening, Olgarin and one of his crewmates were on night watch out on the rain-soaked deck. Lightning flashed across the sky, thunder cracked loud enough to shake the sails, and the storm made it almost impossible to hear anything else. But hidden deep in the ship, Dracula had already slipped out of wherever he had been hiding. The storm gave him the cover he needed. The two crewmen heard strange knocking sounds and each thought the other had made them, so they moved closer to investigate. As one of them stepped forward to check, something moved fast through the darkness, and out of nowhere Dracula lunged and slammed the man's face into the ground with terrifying force. Olgarin saw the monster for a second, just long enough to catch the awful smile it gave him, and then he turned and ran, scrambling up the mast using the ropes, desperate to escape, but Dracula was already climbing after him. Back in their bunks, the doctor and the rest of the crew were jolted awake as the ship suddenly tilted hard to one side. Everyone stumbled out and rushed to the deck to see what was going on, only to realize that the two men on watch had vanished. They first worked together to stabilize the ship, tying down the sails and adjusting the rigging, then began calling out for Olgarin. No one answered at first, but then a few drops of blood fell onto Toby's shoulder, and when they all looked up, they saw Olgarin tangled in the ropes high above, bleeding and barely conscious. They quickly lowered him to the deck, and the doctor realized Olgarin had suffered a serious head injury and was in a delirious, half-mad state. The doctor had to tie him to the table just to treat him. His neck had bite marks, the same kind found on the dead animals, though not as deep. As the doctor worked, he remembered everything Anna had told him and realized this could not be ignored any longer. He told the others about the vampire, about Dracula, and how he was feeding on them one by one. The captain's face turned grim when he heard this. Without delay, he ordered the crew to search every corner of the ship. They checked the cabins, the kitchen, and the lower levels, but found nothing. They made their way to the cargo hold and inspected it too, but still no sign of Dracula. What they did not do was open the crates, because those crates were part of someone else's shipment, and breaking them would mean violating the trust of the client. As the sun dipped low and the sky turned orange, the captain could feel an uneasy weight settling over the ship. His biggest fear was for his grandson, so he told the boy to stay in the captain's cabin and lock the door until morning. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew gathered on deck, deep in discussion, trying to figure out a way to fight what they did not fully understand. But none of them realized that below deck, something far worse was already unfolding. Olgarin, who had been tied down ever since his strange attack, was slowly regaining consciousness. Only now he was no longer human. Dracula had turned him, and though he looked the same, something inside him had changed. Inside the cabin, the boy heard a strange noise outside. Curious and worried, he ignored his grandfather's warning and opened the door just a crack to peek out. What he saw was Olgarin, standing silently in the shadows. The boy stepped out, unsure what was wrong, and asked what was happening, but Olgarin lunged at him without a word and began dragging him back toward the dark. In a flash of instinct, the boy kicked off his coat, wriggled out of his grip, and rolled along the floor until he made it back into the cabin. He slammed the door shut and locked it tight, breathing hard, his heart pounding in his chest. Then came the banging. It started low, but soon the sound grew loud and violent. Olgarin was smashing his head into the wooden door over and over, cracking it open with sheer force. Splinters flew, and soon there was a hole. Thinking fast, the boy climbed onto the table and slammed his fist against the ship's outer hull. That knock was loud enough to travel, and by some miracle, the cook heard it through the noise of the waves and shouted the distress signal. Just as Olgarin reached up to twist the lock and open the door, the doctor came running down the corridor. What he saw stopped him cold. Olgarin was smeared in blood and looked more beast than man. Olgarin turned, grabbed the doctor, and slammed him against the wall with terrifying strength. Before he could do more, the other crew members arrived, wrestled him down, and managed to restrain him. The captain rushed over and called out to his grandson, who was still locked inside. The boy almost opened the door, but then he froze. He saw something crouching in the dark corner of the cabin, something pale and silent. It was Dracula. The creature locked eyes with the boy, then vanished into the shadows. The boy backed away in fear and refused to move. Outside the room, the doctor and the captain tried to force the door open. But just as they did, Dracula reappeared, dropped from the ceiling and pounced on the boy. He grabbed him and sank his teeth into his neck, draining him fast. At that moment, Anna ran through the hallway, lifted a pistol, and blasted the lock off the cabin door. The crew burst inside and found the boy barely breathing, his tiny frame lying on the floor with blood staining his clothes. The doctor scooped the boy up and carried him to safety, hoping it was not too late. Meanwhile, they tied Olgren to the mast out on the deck, but something inside him had already changed forever. He could hear the sound of blood pumping in every person nearby, and the hunger burning through his veins was growing stronger by the minute. The crew, not knowing what vampires truly were, believed he had caught some sort of strange illness, maybe a virus, and kept him restrained. But when the first rays of sunlight hit the ship and touched Olgren's skin, the truth revealed itself in the most horrifying way. Every inch of his body began to burn, his skin sizzled, and he screamed with such agony that it echoed into the sky. The quartermaster had no choice. To end his suffering, he grabbed his weapon and sent him to his death right there on the deck. Silence fell heavy on the crew. They stood in shock, unable to process what they had just seen. But then the cook snapped. He started yelling at everyone, shouting that their sins had cursed this voyage and that the boy would be next. His voice got louder and more unstable as he said the boy should be put down before he turned into a monster too. The quartermaster, already on edge, shoved him back and shouted for silence. The doctor, meanwhile, stood nearby, terrified that the cook might be right. He was scared that the boy, just like Olgren, might be on the edge of madness. That night, one unlucky crew member was standing watch, trying to stay alert. He lit a cigarette, thinking it would help him stay awake, but out of nowhere, the cook appeared behind him and knocked him out cold. Without wasting a second, the cook lowered a lifeboat into the water and escaped into the sea under the cover of darkness. He paddled away quietly, whispering lines from the Bible to keep his fear from eating him alive. Back on the ship, while everyone else slept, the doctor and Anna slipped down into the cargo hold. They were determined to open the crates and find out if Dracula was hiding in one of them. Intending to shoot him down, they pried open one crate after another, digging through them in the dark, but found nothing at first. Then they reached a crate that looked different, one marked with the dragon. They couldn't open it with their hands, but soon Anna noticed some switches at the corners. When they pressed them, the crate slowly opened. Inside, there was nothing but filthy soil crawling with maggots, and beside it lay a strange cane. This was definitely where Dracula had been resting, but it was already deep into the night and he was no longer inside. Meanwhile, out on the waves, the cook thought he had gotten away, but then he heard a sound, something moving through the air, and he started shaking all over. He knew it was too late. Dracula flew toward the lifeboat like a dark shadow, landing silently. He stared at the cook like a predator ready to strike. There was nowhere to run, and the vampire made him his next meal. The blood-stained lifeboat floated gently back toward the ship. The cook was gone, not even a trace of him left anywhere. The crew's numbers were shrinking fast, and the boy had stopped breathing. At sunrise, the crew wrapped the child's body to give him a proper burial at sea. The doctor, now grim and exhausted, asked the captain what they were going to do next. But the captain, broken by everything that had happened, simply said their fate was no longer theirs.
We no longer plot our course. The devil below does, and we all know where he plans to deliver us. To hell, Mr. Clemens.
As they prepared to let Toby go, Anna stepped forward and said the final rites. But just as she finished, the captain noticed something. The boy's body moved ever so slightly. The doctor insisted that the child had no breath left, that it was just a trick of the wind or the light. But the captain, hoping for a miracle, rushed over and pulled back the cloth covering his grandson's face, and right in front of everyone, the boy opened his eyes. A heartbeat later, his body burst into flames. Screaming in agony, the burning boy clung to the captain with both arms. The doctor grabbed him and pushed him overboard into the sea before he could cause more damage, but the captain had already been caught in the fire. Though he survived, half of his body was left scorched and torn. Now, with only one more day to reach London, the doctor realized they could not allow Dracula to reach the city. If the vampire made it to shore, he would vanish into the crowd and kill thousands. They had to end it here on the ship. But when one of the crew shouted that they couldn't even find where Dracula was hiding, the doctor said they had no choice but to set a trap. Anna stepped in right away, shaking her head. She told them that traps wouldn't work. Dracula was too clever and too strong. The only real solution was to sink the ship and take their chances in the lifeboats. The quartermaster refused at first, but the doctor agreed with Anna. It was the only way to stop the evil from spreading. Without wasting time, the crew sealed off the entire cargo hold, blocked every corner, and gathered what little ammunition and weapons they had. The captain had started to lose his mind. Grief twisted something deep inside him, and for a moment, a dark idea took over. He actually thought about using Dracula, the very creature that destroyed them, to bring his grandson back to life. But just as he was slipping further into madness, the doctor stepped in and stood firm. He told the captain that no matter what he believed, nothing could truly bring Toby back. The captain, shaken by anger and sorrow, raised his gun with trembling hands. He was ready to pull the trigger, but before he could do anything, Anna stepped in. She reminded the captain that Dracula did not just kill people. He corrupted them, turned the good in them into something rotten, twisted, and evil. If they gave in now, they would lose more than their lives. She told the captain to remember who he was and to hold on to the memories of the boy he loved and to not destroy them with desperation. Her words hit something deep in the captain's heart. His madness began to fade, and in its place came a new purpose. With his head held high, he joined the others once more, this time swearing to destroy Dracula and avenge his grandson. Later that night, they could finally see the shores of England in the distance. But just as hope started to rise, a thick, ghostly fog rolled across the ship. It swallowed everything, making it hard to see even a few steps ahead. Everyone held their breath, tense and ready, waiting for Dracula to strike. Anna took the wheel of the ship, making herself bait. She knew that Dracula could sense her presence, and she hoped he would come for her. But nothing happened. The ship stayed quiet. The fog got heavier. Anna felt something wasn't right. It was like Dracula already knew what they were trying to do. Then it happened. A sudden gust of wind sliced through the silence, and the sound of wings flapping echoed above them. Dracula dropped from the sky like a shadow, fast and silent. He snatched the rope tied around one of the crew members standing in the lookout tower. The quartermaster lunged forward, trying with all his strength to hold on and save his comrade, but Dracula was too strong. In a flash, the sailor was ripped from the tower and slammed into the sail. His blood splattered across the canvas, and his broken body vanished into the dark. The quartermaster scrambled down the mast, struggling to see through the fog, but before he could warn the others, Dracula struck again, this time from behind. The vampire shoved him with brutal force, sending him crashing through the roof of the captain's cabin. His legs snapped, the pain was unbearable, but he didn't stop. Crawling through broken wood and splinters, he pushed himself out of the cabin and into the cargo hold. But the vampire was after him, fixated on his next prey. Knowing there was no escape, he jammed the door shut behind him and grabbed a nearby axe. With what little strength he had left, he began swinging the axe against the ship's hull. Each strike sent water pouring into the hold. He was flooding the ship on purpose, but before he could do more damage, Dracula came crashing out of the darkness and tore him apart. By the time the doctor reached the cargo hold, it was already too late. The quartermaster was dead and soaked in blood. The doctor pulled the axe from the wooden plank and turned to meet Anna and the captain. But as he stepped out, the sky cracked open. A violent storm had begun, throwing wind and water all around the deck. The captain had taken control of the helm, doing everything he could to keep the ship steady in the storm. He had just tied off the ropes when Dracula appeared behind him and bit deep into his neck. The doctor rushed toward him, but it was too late. The captain was bleeding out fast, his eyes barely able to stay open. His final words were a plea that the doctor must finish what they started and kill the monster before it reached land. Then, with his hand wrapped tightly around the boy's necklace, the captain took his last breath. Now only 2 people were left alive on the ship. The doctor stood firm, gripping an axe in his hand, while Anna stayed close behind. The storm roared around them with the waves crashing, but the doctor shouted into the chaos. He called out the vampire, mocking him, saying he was nothing more than a coward who feared death like every other creature that walked the earth. Suddenly, Dracula appeared out of nowhere, wings stretched wide as he dropped down from the stormy sky. His screech echoed like a banshee through the wind as he slammed into the deck, landing in front of the doctor with a terrifying force. With a single swing of his massive wing, he knocked the doctor off his feet and sent him flying across the ship like a rag doll. The doctor hit the deck hard and lay there, too hurt to stand. In that moment, Anna stepped forward and fired a shot into Dracula's wing. The bullet tore through it, and the vampire let out a furious roar. Blinded by rage, he spun around and swooped down on her, wrapping her body tightly within his wings like a python choking its prey. She gasped for air, struggling to breathe as the storm raged on around them. The doctor, still bleeding and barely able to move, saw what was happening. With everything he had left, he lifted the axe and swung it as hard as he could toward the vampire. The blade struck true, forcing Dracula to release Anna, but before the doctor could pull her to safety, Dracula turned and grabbed him by the throat. The creature traced one of his long, sharp nails across the doctor's neck, revealing his fangs and preparing to feast on his blood. But Anna, still conscious and aware, made one last desperate move. She reached for the ropes that held the mast and cut them. The huge mast groaned and toppled, falling directly toward the vampire. As it crashed down, the doctor broke free and leapt into the sea with Anna in his arms. The mast pierced Dracula's body and pinned him to the deck as he let out a high-pitched shriek that sounded like a dying animal. The wind and waves shoved the wrecked ship closer to the British coastline until it finally smashed against the rocks. Dracula, injured but not defeated, managed to shove the mast off his body and slip into the shadows, escaping once again. Meanwhile, the doctor and Anna clung to floating debris in the freezing ocean, barely alive. But something was changing in Anna. She had started to transform. Her skin had paled, her breathing slowed, and the hunger for blood was already starting to show in her eyes. The doctor wanted to continue the transfusions, to buy more time, but Anna stopped him. She told him it would never last. No amount of medicine could stop what was coming. She was turning into a monster, and she knew it. And rather than become something that would hurt innocent people, she made a choice. As the first morning light crept over the water, Anna welcomed the rising sun. Her body burst into flames, choosing to die as herself before the beast could fully take over. Some time passed, and the doctor finally returned to land alone. He hadn't healed, and he hadn't moved on. He had only one goal left: to find Dracula and finish what they started. He traveled across towns and cities, searching high and low, never letting the trail go cold. Then one day, a sound stopped him in his tracks. A man walked slowly, his footsteps calm, but the doctor knew. That sound was burned into his mind. Dracula had returned, hiding in plain sight, waiting to strike again. The doctor stood tall, eyes locked on the figure, and without hesitation he followed.